Over my lifetime, I've investigated a lot of crimes, and in the Jennifer Embry homicide, in looking at what took place in her townhouse on that day, sure, she was a really neat person, and so her whole life was very orderly and very organized. But when you see the scene, it was too orderly, it was too clean, it was too neat.
A crime scene that doesn't quite add up. 29-year-old Jennifer Embry is found dead in her bathtub. Could it have been an accident, or was it murder? Jennifer Embry is always on time for everything. She never misses a day of school or work. So on one January morning, when she doesn't show up for either, her brother gets worried and decides to stop by her house.
What Ricky told us was he went up to the door, saw that Jennifer's car was there, noticed that the lights were on in the house, went up to the front door, and as he placed his key to the lock, the door swung open.
Ricky Embry calls out his sister's name, but gets no answer. As he walks towards Jennifer's room, he checks the bathroom and finds Jennifer lying motionless in the tub.
There was no signs of any type of forced entry into the house, anything physical that would look like somebody had torn or broken in any place. I had a young lady in a bathtub who was deceased in an unsecure house.
Detective Hinson notices that the lights are on in every room, and the house is spotless.
You could almost see the sweeper marks in the carpet where it looked like it had been swept.
Jennifer's bed is neatly turned down, and the bathroom where her body was found is as clean as the rest of the house.
There were some throw rugs around the toilet. There was a pair of slippers on the floor. There was some towels on the top of the toilet lid that was closed. And then there was, on the countertop by the sink, a nightie and some panties.
At first glance, it looks like Jennifer may have passed out in the tub while taking a bath and then drowned. But something about the scene bothers Detective Hinson.
The shower curtain was on the outside of the tub, and both of the chiffon and the shower curtain itself was pushed to the one side. The rods were somewhat askew a little, and on one end of the shower rods was looked like a towel or a washcloth of some type that looked like as if they had been pressed in there to keep the shower rods up. It didn't look normal, and I didn't have enough information, which is why we decided to proceed with processing the scene with the way we did.
The body is sent to Dr. Bonifacio Floro, the medical examiner in the city of Jacksonville, to determine whether or not this is an accidental death.
It could have been an accidental drowning. That's why we're there, and we would like to know more about the person. We would like to know if this person had illness or organic brain disease to rule out. And I found out later on that she was a healthy young female. There is no reason for her to, say, die of drowning due to epileptic seizure.
In the course of his examination, Dr. Floro also observes evidence of a sexual assault, so DNA is sent to the lab for testing. When he notices some bruising around the neck, Dr. Floro concludes that this is no accident.
This was a homicide. Jennifer died of strangulation and drowning.
Knowing that a killer is on the loose, Detective Hinson wastes no time calling an old friend to assist him with the case, Special Agent Dale Hinman. From the moment she sees the crime scene photos, Hinman knows that there is more to this homicide than meets the eye.
Everything about this crime, to me, looked like that the victim had been placed in the bathtub on purpose to look as though this crime was an accident. So I felt that the whole scene was staged to make it look like something that it wasn't.
Agent Hinman has plenty of experience reading between the lines of a crime scene. As the first female profiler in the state of Florida, Hinman has investigated hundreds of cases since her training at the FBI profiling unit in Quantico, Virginia. That training allowed her to develop a special instinct, the ability to place herself in the role of victim and killer.
Hi, good to see you.
Good to see you too. How you doing? Have a good trip?
Very well. Yes, I did. Thank you.
Before a profile of the killer can be developed, Hinman needs to take a close look at the facts of the case, especially the photographic evidence.
It's so overly staged that it becomes suspicious by how much is done. The position of the slippers here is totally unnatural for someone taking them off. When people are getting ready for a shower, they would face the mirror, or using the toilet, they would be here, but why take them off in this direction or step out of them in the direction of the shower? And when you take things from your drawer and bring them into the bathroom, you don't carry them folded. You just carry them and let them hang.
Right, like the towels on the toilet seat, and the fact that all the shower curtains were pushed to one side when they were actually, you remember when we were talking, they were actually the ornate ones that kind of draped.
But there was no evidence of any struggle throughout the house. She was a neat and tidy housekeeper, but this is beyond neat and tidy. This is homicide crime scene cleanup.
Agent Hinman and Detective Hinson speculate that Jennifer was probably attacked in her bathroom. Had she pulled the shower rod from the wall as she struggled for her life? Had the killer then drowned her and tried to cover his tracks by placing the broken shower rod back in its place? In Jacksonville, Florida, a 29-year-old woman is found dead in her bathtub. But what looks like an accident turns out to be murder. Now, in order to catch a killer, investigators must learn more about the victim.
Jennifer Embry was a low-risk victim participating in a low-risk activity. She had 2 jobs and was a student, so she came in contact with a lot of people, but she came straight home, went into her apartment, and locked her door. This shouldn't have happened to her.
Jennifer's good friend Carol Thomas remembers that Jennifer was extremely security conscious, both in and out of the house.
When she get in the car, she locks her door. She keep her house locked, very secure. She was very protective. Always, try to go the safe route. She didn't try to go anywhere alone.
And according to friends and family, Jennifer was nearly impossible to dislike.
When I initially found out, the first thing I said was, whoever done it could not have known her. It had to be a stranger, because no one that knew her would want to hurt her. She was just that type of person.
But someone had done more than hurt Jennifer. They had killed her. And for Detective Hinson, everyone who knew Jennifer is a suspect.
We talked to everybody, anybody that could have possibly been a friend or an associate. I went and I interviewed them. I swabbed their mouth. I spoke to them. I tried to include them or eliminate them, and most everybody I talked to was eliminated.
But there is one person who was seen with Jennifer at the Florida Technical College that detectives cannot identify.
There was a conversation with some of the people at the school that a gentleman had come by and identified himself as a law enforcement officer, and that he wanted to speak to him. And at that point, we didn't know who that person was. We didn't know anybody that she was dating that would have fit that particular profile.
A check with local law enforcement agencies reveals no one who matches the stranger's description. Frustrated, detectives move on to other leads, while Special Agent Hinman takes another look at the clues in the case.
When you have no forced entry into an apartment that has an alarm, has a deadbolt, and has security measures, what this means to us is that the individual either knew the victim and was recognized by her so that she would open the door and allow him in, or that the individual could come up with such a good con that somebody as bright as Jennifer would agree to let them in.
Agent Hinman is well aware that charm and calculation can be a deadly combination. As a young profiler, she was involved in the investigation of the notorious serial killer, Ted Bundy.
Ted Bundy, for an example, would approach women and he would have his arm in a cast or a sling or be on crutches and ask for someone's assistance in order to get them away from a larger group of people to get control of them.
At the end of his murderous career, Bundy snuck into a sorority house on the Tallahassee campus of Florida State University. While inside, he bludgeoned 2 young women to death and left 2 others in a coma. Special Agent Hinman, then a new investigator for the Leon County Sheriff's Department, was assigned to stand by the victims' hospital beds in case they ever regained consciousness.
At the time that investigation was ongoing, I had not been really acquainted with the ongoings in a major task force in a serial murder investigation. So the majority of what my life was about at that point was observing the more experienced investigators and learning from what they were doing.
Among other insights, Agent Hinman learned that Bundy was an organized killer, a highly intelligent killer who planned his crimes meticulously. Was the person who murdered Jennifer Embry cut from the same calculating mold as Ted Bundy?
This individual to me was different than somebody that I had seen before. This is a lady that is in a bathtub that's just been drowned. This is a violent act, but yet he's comfortable and calm enough that he takes a pair of slippers and a towel and her nightie and her panties, puts it in. He even goes to the degree of placing soap and a washcloth into the tub with her. And the thought process isn't panic. It's calm. He's doing this to make my job harder.
Next, on Body of Evidence, detectives discover that Jennifer Embry may not be the only victim of the calculating killer. After sifting through countless leads, detectives in Jacksonville, Florida, still have not solved the mystery of Jennifer Embry's death. But Special Agent Hinman is optimistic that the killer will be caught.
It only takes one thing. In spite of all the cleanup and the preparation and the staging and all that took place during this crime, all it takes is one piece of evidence to point the detective in the right direction.
In this case, that one piece of evidence is a DNA sample left at the Embry crime scene. Hundreds of other DNA samples have been compared against it. And finally, after 3 long years, investigators get the break they've been waiting for.
I was at the medical examiner's office on an unrelated case, and I remember getting a page to call the lab, and he told me that I had a match.
The DNA matches an inmate who's serving time in a Florida state prison for arson and burglary. Someone known as an experienced and organized criminal. James Robert Belcher has been in and out of jail for robberies, assaults, and various petty crimes. But one case in particular stands out. In 1989, Belcher had been convicted of entering a woman's home and sexually assaulting her. The details of that crime are eerily similar to those in the Jennifer Embry case.
She was taken out of her bed. She was taken into the bathroom where she was sexually assaulted. She identified Mr. Belcher through that assault.
But there is one major difference. Belcher's first victim lived to tell her tale. Jennifer Embry did not. Why the difference? Agent Hinman theorizes it could be as simple as this. He learned from his mistakes.
If you are involved in a crime where the person identifies you and you are punished for it and go to prison, if you're going to commit the same crime over again and you kill the victim, then essentially you can get away with it because there isn't a witness or the victim that can turn you in or report you.
A closer look at Belcher's criminal record by prosecutor Bernie De La Rionda reveals another possible connection between Jennifer Embry's case and the victim who had been attacked by James Belcher years before.
The victim in the prior case described him as maybe like a law enforcement person, like an FBI agent or something, very well dressed, well spoken.
Everything begins to fall into place for Detective Hinson. Belcher had told the previous victim that he was a law enforcement officer. Was he the mystery man witnesses saw talking with Jennifer at her school? Hinson checks with Jennifer's friend, Carol Thomas.
Detective Hinson actually came to my job, and he brought the picture of that guy, and he was like, "Do you know him?" And I was like, "No, I've never seen him before." And he was like, "Well, are you sure? You know, out of all the pictures you have, did you go through them? Are you sure you've never seen him?" I'm like, "I've never seen that guy before, and that does not look like anybody that I've known that she's ever dated."
But two witnesses have a different recollection. They pick Belcher out of a photo lineup immediately. He's the man they saw with Jennifer Embry, the man who claimed he was a law enforcement officer. What makes them certain? A scar on his face makes him unforgettable. Detectives then discovered that at the time Jennifer was attending school, James Belcher lived right around the corner from the college. With a prime suspect identified, Hinman knows that the next step is to visit James Belcher in jail and ask him some questions.
Robbie Hinson's approach to James Belcher at this point was extremely critical. We needed to know that James Belcher was not Jennifer's boyfriend, that they had not dated, that they had not been boyfriend and girlfriend, and that there's no legitimate reason why DNA that belonged to him should be associated with her apartment in any way, shape, or form.
Coming up, can investigators crack a suspected killer? 3 years after the murder of Jennifer Embry, investigators are finally able to zero in on a suspect, James Robert Belcher. But Special Agent Dale Hinman knows that before Belcher can be charged with any crime, he needs to come face to face with detectives.
He had to be approached in a way that did not tip him off to the idea that Robbie Hinson already had DNA evidence that matched him. But we needed to be able to point out that there was absolutely no legitimate reason for DNA that belonged to him to be associated with her in any way.
The meeting with Belcher takes place behind bars. How he responds to questions will affect the entire case.
I advised him of his rights, and he agreed to speak to me. And I showed the picture of Jennifer, and I said, we're investigating her death investigation, and I wanted to know if you knew her. And he looked at the picture, and he said no. I put another picture in front of him. I said, well, let me show you another one here. And he said no.
Just to make sure, Hinson asks for a third time.
So I put the picture back down in front of him again, and I told him, I said, I know I'm a policeman, and I know, but it's very important, you know, did you tell me? And he said, look, detective, she's real pretty. I'd remember her. And when he said that, I said, that's it. That's enough. At that point in time, I thought we had him.
Belcher's denial that he knew Jennifer Embry made it impossible for him to explain why his DNA was found at the crime scene. It was time to charge James Belcher with murder.
He denied having ever any type of relationship with her or knowing her or being in the house at all. And we were able to prove through other witnesses that had described a person and identified Mr. Belcher as being at the school looking for her. We had 2 witnesses who came forward, and that was crucial because that called him basically a liar, that he was lying about that.
With a DNA match in hand and incriminating witness testimony, prosecutor Bernie De La Rionda is able to mount a strong case against Belcher. The jury finds him guilty in less than 2 hours. At sentencing, the prosecutor argues for the death penalty on the premise that Jennifer Embry knew she was going to die.
You have the victim. The last thing she sees is his hands, his face, as he is strangling her, and she is fighting for her life.
The jury recommends the death penalty, and the case finally comes to a close.
I was just so happy that they caught the person that could hurt someone so sweet, so loving.
James Belcher is currently on Florida's death row. To this day, he denies knowing or ever coming into contact with Jennifer Embry.
She had to know him or she wouldn't have let him in. It's most likely that he came and knocked on the door and that she opened the door and let him in, and that one thing led to another, and what he wanted to do was not something that was in character for what she wanted to do. And so he forced her, and that he had to kill her so that she wouldn't report him. This is a crime that just should not have taken place. Jennifer was doing everything right. She was a wonderful person, you know, a wonderful member of her family and of her community. She was working so hard at the 2 jobs and going to school. She was going to really be somebody. And it's just such a tragedy that this happened to her and that her family is forever robbed of her being there.